Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and today we got a new video series for you all. It has been very hotly requested on the channel that we do builds and class builds on the channel, and you know what? I think you're right. But let me go ahead and give some stipulations first. These builds are going to be based on playstyle choices predominantly, ways that you can play the game to alter it significantly compared to standards way of playing. Not only that, but these builds will not be 100% here's what you need top to bottom. I will go into every class feat that you should pick, but if you're using free archetype, I'll give some options for that. I'll give some equipment recommendations, ancestry recommendations, but I'm going to leave these predominantly open so that you can customize these playstyles to the choice or to your preferred choice, which means all you hardcore number crunchers out there, don't get on me about this not being the optimal way to do this or that or whatever. These are designed to be very general purpose to do a playstyle choice. And, you know, I feel like I have a good enough understanding of the game to give them at least enough that they are going to be pretty powerful regardless. If you have your own ideas, hey, leave it in the comments below. And talking about, I guess, the channel. If you like this kind of video, or if you like this video, like it. And if you want to see more of this kind of video, subscribe to see more, as I'll be trying to do these like once a week or so. Not only that, but you can join our Discord where we talk all things tabletop, including the war games like Warhammer 40k. And I always recruit there first for any of the games we do here on the channel. So if you want a chance to play with me and my friends, you know where to go. Speaking of the description, I will also leave a written form of the build and my recommendations in the description. So check it out. But let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be talking about a build that me and my friends have been playing around with a bit, but it's going to be called the Dread Striker for the fighter. So the Dread Striker is completely orientated around giving enemies the frightened condition and taking advantage of that. Since you are a fighter and with your preferred weapon choice, you get a +2 advantage over other classes to hit. This is going to be a predominantly two-handed weapon build, with the idea that your high accuracy, also with reducing the enemy's AC with the frightened condition, will make it much more likely for you to crit. And to give you the biggest, juiciest crits we can, we're going to use two-handed weapons as the primary weapon type for this version of the build. There are a lot of ways to make a Dread Striker kind of character build. This is the one I feel like is the easiest and has a very clear aesthetic for it. Let's go ahead and get started with the basics, shall we? We'll get to the Ancestries later for what you want to pick. Let's just talk about the stats right now. Doesn't matter what background you pick, really, honestly. And obviously, for your fighter class, we're going to be picking strength as that attribute boost. But you're going to want to primarily focus strength to con to charisma. Charisma is very important for this build because you're going to be using intimidation to demoralize for some of the effects. And strength is absolutely necessary. You want your strength to be as high as you can. One, because you're going to be wearing heavier armor, and thus the higher strength build will reduce the amount of penalties you have. And two, it increases your accuracy dramatically. So we want to start with your strength at like an 18 preferably. Your con is very important for this build for general combat prowess, and I'd put it equal with charisma for necessity for the build. So starting out, if you have at least an 18 in your strength and a 14 in both your con and your charisma, you're going to be good to go. And it is very important that you have at least a 14 con in your, or a 14 con for the purposes of this build. Now this build, for whatever other attribute boosts that you would like to do, I do recommend investing in Dex at least until 14, and that will become apparent a little bit later in the build. But do not dump your Dex. We'll need your Dex to be at least a 14 eventually, towards the late game. So starting off with at least one boost in Dex is really good, and when you hit level 5, you can put your next boost in Dex, and you'll be good to go. Not only that, but having a decent Dex, even starting out, even if it's +1, makes it so that some of the armors you wear, because plate mail you can't get right off the bat, it makes it easier to just have armor that's like in the medium class or whatever that still gives you a little bit of a bonus. All right, so skill proficiencies. This is easy. Even if you dump your intelligence, even if you have a -1 to your intelligence, you can still pick out at least intimidation and athletics. These are two very important. Athletics is just going to be very useful for your character because you're already hard investing in strength anyway. And intimidation is absolutely paramount. You're going to be boosting your intimidation whenever you get the ability to do so. So always put, whenever you get the chance, up your intimidation. Then I recommend your athletics. Athletics can be given away to some other, skills if you have an idea for your character, obviously, like maybe diplomacy, society, whatever. But you do want to at least be trained. Actually, you want to be expert at minimum, and eventually you want to get at least to, I think, legendary, because scare to death is one of the feats in this build, and I think that's one of its requirements. Feat choices for fighter. Fighter, there's not really many, there's like no subclass versions of fighter, so you don't have to worry about picking anything there. And we'll get to a weapon choice towards the end when I'm talking about equipment, but let's just talk about feats, shall we? So, feats, right? You get one at level 1 because law marshals get one at level 1 that don't have accessibilities. Obviously, things like casters usually don't get a feat until level 2. Level 1, fighter. You're going to want to pick up power attack. Power attack is going to be immensely helpful. It's a really good way to stack on damage, especially if you're using a two-handed weapon. And because power attack is essentially being used in the place of a second attack, you just have a higher accuracy to do a bunch of damage. And because this type of build, the Dreadstriker build, is focused on hopefully critting enemies more often than not, power attack is going to do immense damage to whatever your target is overall. It's absolutely paramount that you pick up power attack. Intimidating attack is another really good one. Now, it could be argued that it's a little pricey action efficiency wise. More or less what happens is that it's a 2 action feat, and if you successfully strike the target, they become frightened 1, and if you crit them, they become frightened 2. Intimidating strike is a good way to maintain frightened 2 on a target, actually, believe it or not, which is really good for supporting your team, considering that's 2 actions, and it makes your third action a little bit harder, or well, your next attack a little bit harder, not by much, because I don't believe it takes up 2 attacks like power attack does. But this is really good as well, because when you demoralize a target, they become immune to it for a minute or 10 minutes either way, which means that after you demoralize a target once, you're going to need a different source of getting a target frightened to maintain essentially the bulk of this build. So this one becomes a little bit paramount, and it's very, very important. At level 4, we're going to be dipping into Barbarian, which is why you needed at least that 14 in con, because you're going to be obviously above 14 con in strength. The Barbarian dedication is going to be really big for a variety of ways, but the main reason why I put it here is that it adds to the Dreadstriker kind of playstyle. You are a two-handed weapon fighter coming up in heavy armor. You're going to be hard to take down. The enemies are going to become weaker in front of you. It's going to be harder for them to do damage to you. And when you pick Barbarian, even though you're going to take an AC penalty because the enemy is going to be frightened, that's just going to make you armor neutral compared to, what you would be without raging. So raging just gives you extra damage. You do an additional 2 damage with all of your strikes, which makes those critical strikes even better. And not only that, but you gain an additional amount of hit points equal to your level plus your con, making you even more sturdy, giving you more staying power on the battlefield, and giving you that Dreadnought, the Juggernaut style character build. It's very good, but we're also picking up for some certain feats. Now, one thing to remember, you're going to want to use the rage after you use your demoralize on your primary target, because when you're raging, you cannot actually demoralize a target until you pick up a feat, which we'll pick up next level. So when you hit level 6, you're going to take up the basic Fury archetype feat, which you're going to pick a level 1 or 2 Barbarian feat, and you're going to pick up the Intimidating Rage. And what Intimidating Rage does is it allows you to, well, 1, it gives you 2 skill feats. You gain access to Intimidating Glare and Scare to Death as soon as you meet the prerequisites for it. So that's 2 skill feats that get lifted off of what you need for this character, and allows you to invest those skill feats in other kind of feats that are helpful for your build or helpful for your roleplay, either way. Not only that, but this allows you to use Demoralize in combat while you're raging. So now you can start off combat raging and still keep up your demoralize on your targets. And this is just a really good way to feed into the Juggernaut build even more. All right, level 8, we're picking up Furious Focus, which is really good because power attack is going to be your primary way of dealing damage. If you're right up on the opponent, they're frightened, and you use power attack, you're going to make it really hard for yourself to make another attack because that would be your third attack normally. With Furious Focus, this makes your power attack be considered only one attack towards your multi-attack penalty, giving you another chance to strike the enemy doing a lot of damage, and maybe even crit depending. It'd still be -5, but it's better than -10. So, this is just allowing you to keep the damage on, to pummel your enemies into the ground, and it's really, really good. Next up on the list is Fearsome Brute, and this is going to be one of those feats that are the keystones to how this build works, stacks on with everything else. So what Fearsome Brute does is you get a circumstance bonus to damage against targets who are frightened, and I believe they have to be frightened of you. Nope, just frightened creatures in general. So any creature that is frightened, you do extra damage to, either double the frightened value, or if you're a master in Intimidation, which hopefully by this point you will be, you'll do triple their frightened condition whenever you strike them. That's immense. That means you're doing at minimum 3 extra damage, and likely to do 6 extra damage. And because Rage just gives you extra damage, not circumstance bonus, they stack together, making your hits powerful, doing tons of damage, making your crits do immense amounts of damage. So this is one of the keystone feats that you need to pick up for this particular build. At level 12 is when the build kind of splits off into 2 paths based on your style of play. One is based on if you're playing standard rules, and another is if you're using the optional rule of the free bonus archetypes. Now, if you are using the standard rules, I recommend picking up Knockdown. You're using a 2-handed weapon already, and this allows you to attempt to floor an enemy, which is very detrimental to them. And because you have attack of opportunity innately as a fighter, if you successfully knock an enemy down, they're going to have to get up, and you're going to hit them for it. And because the fear conditions end at the end of their next turn, if you demoralize, knock down, when they're getting up, you're going to have a better chance to hit them. And not only that, but while they're frightened, they're actually going to be weaker to you knocking them down because you're bringing down their reflex DC. This is a really good way to pile on the effects, pile on the status penalties, because being prone gives you a circumstance penalty for being flat-footed. It stacks with the status penalty from frightened, making an enemy incredibly weak if they're both prone and frightened. It's a very powerful combination. Now, if you are using the free bonus archetype rule, though, and you pick up Mauler, then you don't need to pick up Knockdown because you'll just pick it up through Mauler. In which case, I recommend picking up Wounded Rage from Barbarian using the Fury archetype feat, as it allows you to pick up a feat that's your level or half your level or lower. Wounded Rage is level 4. You'll be able to pick it up at this point, and it just frees up one of your actions. You no longer need to use an action to rage, because when an enemy hits you, you can just use your reaction to rage if you're not planning to use an attack of opportunity. Next up, the split continues, because I recommend taking Improved Knockdown, so you don't even need to make an athletics check. All you need to do is successfully strike your target, and you automatically crit trip them, which does damage to them. It makes Improved Knockdown is just a really strong feat. It's really solid. If you're taking Knockdown, you gotta take Improved Knockdown. They just work so well together. They work for this build. And not only that, but because you don't even need to worry about an athletics check, just being a fighter will make you more likely to trip people, which is immense. Now, if we are using the bonus archetype rule, as we mentioned before, then obviously Improved Knockdown is a part of Mauler. So I recommend taking the Swashbuckler dedication. You don't get the precision damage from... I don't even think you would normally get the precision damage from Panache. But you do get Panache. And if you have Panache, I believe it's they're one of its styles. I'll put it up on screen here. Gives you a bonus to intimidating enemies while you have Panache. So innately, when you intimidate an enemy using Demoralize, you will get a bonus to further demoralizes that you make for the rest of the combat. This stacks perfectly well with your build already, makes you likely to crit demoralize people, which gives them a higher penalty, which means you do more damage to them. It all stacks together really, really well. For level 16, this is the final split between two possible build choices, and honestly, it could go either way. Now, if you've been taking the knockdown feats up until this point, just take Advantageous Assault. It's a unique strike that you use when an enemy is prone, and it pretty much guarantees you do extra damage to prone targets, even if you miss. And even if you don't miss, you do extra damage to prone targets. I'd have to... Actually, 1 second. Okay, it's what I thought. Advantageous Assault does do Circumstance extra bonus damage, which doesn't stack with Fearsome Brute. But if an enemy is mindless, knocking down an enemy and hurting them on the ground is just helpful overall. This makes your build more dynamic. This makes you available even in situations where you're dealing with enemies who cannot feel fear, and that's why I really like the knockdown feats in general, because even if the enemy can't feel fear, they can more than likely be tripped. So the Advantageous Assault just stacks on with that part of the build. Now, if you are using the bonus archetype rule, you can either take the basic Flair Swashbuckler archetype feat, which you take to get to Antagonize, which is the second level feat from Swashbuckler. And what Antagonize does is if you demoralize a target, that target cannot reduce its frightened condition below 1 unless it uses an action against you or somehow manages to visually and audio block you out for a full round. This is very powerful for this build in general because it forces enemies to attack you, and because you're building your character like a Juggernaut with heavy armor, extra health, whatever, this allows you to play the tank a lot better, or this just makes enemies weaker against your allies. It's a very strong utility feat, and it works overall for the build. Or you can take Advantageous Assault because of what I mentioned prior with Advantageous Assault. I think both are equal if you're playing just the standard set of rules, because Advantageous Assault just works on your own damage, while Antagonize is just a support ability. It just depends on what you want to do. I recommend the basic Flair going into Antagonize just because it gives you more party dynamics and more teamwork and will help your teammates out a lot. At level 18, you're taking Savage Critical, giving you a chance to critical if you roll a 19, as long as the strike is a success. More damage, Intimidate, Fearsome Brute. I don't know what more to say about that. It's just, the more likely chance you are to crit, the more this build just gives you a bunch of damage. So yeah, there's that. At level 20, I recommend taking Weapon Supremacy, for the obvious reason that it gives you an additional action every round. You become quickened, and with this quicken action, all you can do is strike. This is really good, especially because a lot of your strikes are 2-action strikes, and makes it hard to move during this time. So this allows you to either move, 2-action strike, and then strike, which is very solid, or this allows you to demoralize, 2-action strike, and then strike, which again is very, very powerful. So yeah, this is my recommendation for the feats. There's a lot of variants, I'm sure, out there, but for this Juggernaut style, 2-handed weapon, heavy armor user, this is my recommendation. I did mention during the feats part about some bonus archetypes, or the bonus archetype feats. So if you are using bonus archetype in your game, which I highly recommend most games do, because it just gives your character more abilities. It doesn't make them necessarily stronger as much as it does giving them more options. I recommend, first of all, Mauler, 100%. Mauler builds into this really, really well, and it works with the build 100%. Next, I'm going to recommend Sentinel. It makes the armor you wear, heavy armor, easier. You get a bunch of feats to make your armor better, to improve your survivability a lot. You get your armor specialization for your armor, which is really solid. Overall, Sentinel works really well. It'll make you a Juggernaut. You can walk into the battlefield. Don't need to worry about having, a shield. Don't need to worry about nothing. You're going to be very hard to kill if you take Sentinel. Martial is a really good one. If you want to use your charisma and you want to go Dread Martial, that just turns this build into... You have the ability to be the Dread Juggernaut or to be the Dread Martial, who is supporting their allies with some of their actions. It's a very good way if you want to give yourself some more teamwork. I really like the Dread Martial kind of build around this. And for bonus archetype, it's a really good choice, honestly. I really like it. And if you want something that's just a little bit more thematic, something that's a little bit more stylish, something for that good RP flair, go Hellknight. Hellknights are all about being intimidating, all about being up in the lines of combat, and Hellknight and Dreadstriker just go together like PB&J. So, you know, those are my recommended archetypes for all kinds of different playstyles. Skill feats I recommend taking with this build overall is Intimidating Prowess. It allows you to get a circumstance bonus to your to your demoralize or coerce rolls based on how strong your character is. It requires that you're expert in intimidation. You get a +1 at first, and then it can become a +2 if your strength is 20 and you're a master in intimidation. Now, with this one, I will state that it does not stack with the bonus from Panache, but it can overcome it and become better than the Panache bonus. Either way, having Panache or taking Swashbuckler to get the Antagonize makes it worth it in my eyes. But that's just something to keep in mind with your builds out there, is just keep in mind that this is a feat that's really good. And if you're not playing with bonus archetypes, then this is probably the one I would go for. I also recommend the skill feat Terrifying Resistance, because it gives you a +1 save against spell saves. It gives you a +1 bonus against spell saves against targets you have demoralized. It means you can yell at the enemy wizard and have a better chance of getting through some of their spells. It's really great. And it just has to be enemies that you have demoralized. It doesn't even matter if they have the frightened condition anymore at that point. For the next 24 hours, you get that circumstance bonus. Terrifying Resistance is a really good pickup. I also am going to highly recommend picking up Titan Wrestler, because with those knockdown and improved knockdown feats, this will allow you to topple even the mightiest of giants. And because the Barbarian is going to go ahead and give you Intimidating Glare and Scare to Death, those are two feats you don't even have to worry about. As far as the rest of your skill feats, yeah, do what you want with them. Honestly, there's a lot of different ways you can outfit your character and make them really good. And skill feats are still not like a super core power element in the game. So use them to gussy your character up, do some roleplay stuff, give yourself some utility. There's a lot of different ways you can use skill feats to benefit your character. Oh, I almost forgot Battle Cry. Battle Cry is so good because you can demoralize a bunch of enemies and an emanation around you. It's just a very solid feat. Ancestries, I don't like to give Ancestry recommendations just because people have different mental aesthetics for the characters they like, and sometimes what ancestry you are is very important to people. I will go ahead and say Hobgoblin, if you want just pure efficiency, is one of the best ones, because they get a feat really early on called Remorseless Lash that makes it where if you've struck a target that is frightened of you, they can't reduce that condition below 1 on their next turn. It's really good, and honestly, it could be a make or break point for this build specifically, because it can keep targets more intimidated of you. Hobgoblin would be the one I'd highly recommend. But another option as well is Darkfield's Kitsune. It's a really interesting one because the heritage of Darkfield's Kitsune gives you a amount of temporary HP when you intimidate or demoralize a target, either 3 or the creature's level, whichever is higher, which means in later parts of the game you just get more temporary hit points. Doesn't stack with the rage, obviously, but it's just something to consider, especially for early game survivability. And I like it. There's a lot of things that you can do with Kitsune to really spice your character up. Last but not least, we're going to talk about equipment. And I'm not going to get into all the equipment in the game. No. I'm just going to talk about important pieces or recommendations for the primary parts of this build. 1, get the Dread property rune on your armor as soon as you can, which is level 6. What it does is the enemy needs to make a will DC based on the level of the armor, or the level of the rune at the end of their turn, to see if they can reduce their frightened condition below 1. This is super paramount, especially if you're not playing the Hobgoblin, because it can keep your enemies frightened for an extended period of time, and it's solid overall, and it's a really good rune to have on your armor, honestly. Not only that, what weapon you use two-handed for this build could really be anything. You could go for a reach weapon if you really want to utilize your attack of opportunity, or you could just go for a weapon, which I recommend, that has a big bang to it. I actually like the Greatpick for this build specifically. Even though, obviously, as a fighter, you get a higher proficiency for the weapons that your main weapon that you pick, weapon type, Picks isn't a super good one because there's only, I think, one two-handed pick, strangely enough. So that, keep that in mind. Whatever weapon you pick a weapon type you really like. But the picks are really good, purely for the fact that the Greatpick has Fatal D12. So if you critically strike an enemy, it turns the dice to D12s, and you do an additional D12 on top of it. Not only that, but the pick critical effect is really good because the critical specialization effect is you deal additional damage 2 per weapon die. This is not circumstance bonus. This is just extra damage. Stacks with rage, stacks with everything else in the build. The Greatpick will make your crits even better, and it's really, really good. So yeah, that's my Dread Striker build. I hope you all liked it. I'm sorry if this video went a little bit long. These videos are going to be a little bit more in-depth, and if it's too vague for you, I'm sorry. I don't want to tell you how to play the game. No one should tell you how to play the game. I told you what feats to pick for this kind of playstyle, and this playstyle is all about keeping your enemies demoralized or knocking them flat on their butt and then critting them with the penalties they're getting to their AC from those two conditions. It's a really fun build, especially when you go Juggernaut. You feel unstoppable. You're wading into the battlefield. You're knocking enemies left and right. You're dealing massive amounts of damage, especially if they're weak little enemies. And for a fighter build, this is just a ridiculously fun build. So yeah. Anyway, hope you liked it. Leave down in the comments below maybe your choice for build stuff. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have good luck in your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.